I hope you're awake. That's going to be quite a long session. It's a bit unusual because it's not specifically about PowerShell. It's not specifically about DSC or anything technology very specifics, but it really, if you're doing automation and if you're doing system administration or these kind of things, that's definitely related to you. So, what are we going to talk about? I will do very quickly, so then if you feel it's not for you, you can go to the other rooms. It's about configuration management. So the first thing is, what is configuration management? We're going to talk about this and have a quick look. What are we talking about? And then, everyone's heard automate, 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 right? That's, everyone like it and endorse it. It's like, why do you automate for? So we're just going to try to think about what's the actual, I don't want to give you a hint already, but why do we automate and what decisions are we making when we automate something? And then we will see we don't want to automate just for the sake of automation, so we're going to go a bit deeper, and we're going to think about customer value and change capability. And I'm going to explain those, like customer, what is a customer for us, and things like this. And then strategy versus tactics, like big words. But when you do a quick win, what's the impact of a quick win? What is going on? If you say, we want to work on this or that, you make a choice. Which one's going to provide value to you, to your team, or to your organization? And what is the automation fear cycle? So when you create automation, sometimes people are in fear of automation, and that's why they just can't adopt automation. At some point, they're going to revert back to, actually, we're just going to do this manually. And that's a big problem sometimes. And I'm going to try to explain some of it. And, sorry, or the tool questions. I want to do this with that tool, but it doesn't do that specific thing, so I'm not doing anything. So I'm going to go a bit deeper into the thinking process behind this. I call it analysis paralysis, and people can relate to this. I've been in there. All these, I should have said, this is the mistakes I've made, and I'm just trying to share them with you. Understand the complexity problem. So everything is a scaling problem to some extent, and I just want to go a bit deeper with this, and people see what a scaling problem can be, and it's many scaling problems together that just creates a big mess that we're in. So there's quite a few things to go, and there's going to be a lot of slides, but I'm trying to explain with diagrams and things, so hopefully I will be able to keep you awake for a bit. And the first question is, what is configuration management? So, can you stand up just to wake you up a bit? Please stand up. Just because I don't want you to be, I want to be on your toes for the session. So no, if you think, which one did I do? If you think you are doing configuration management, stand up, but otherwise sit down. If you're not doing configuration management, you can sit down. Oh, that's cool. So what are you doing in configuration management? Shout some terms. If I say configuration management, I do it because I do. Say something? Say again? Okay. Someone else? Okay, apps configuration, is that what I heard, roughly? Yeah, okay, thank you, you can sit down. So for all those who were sitting down, are you sysadmins? Are you devs? Do you manage any type of systems using PowerShell? Yeah, most likely you're doing configuration management. There's just different type. So one of the key elements is I see configuration management in the field as a spectrum, and I could see there's different type of versions. So if you've heard about function as a service, or if you're doing things manually, that can be just a different spectrum. What you're doing is you're managing some configuration somehow. And you can see it. The dirty model I put in my mind is there's what we've done for a long time, especially in the Windows shops. We've been automating Windows. No, we've been managing Windows environments for a long time. And we used graphical user interface. And I was an happy click next admin for a bit. And I was trying to automate some things with Visual Basics, VBS and stuff. Obviously not much, because that's a time sink. But it was still configuration management. And we have some tools which are really good at doing this at a bigger scale, still doing click next admin. And I would say some things like system configuration management, configuration manager, this kind of things, SCCM, or some of the tools are really good at scaling the click next kind of approach. So it's still doing configuration management, and it can be pretty efficient in some ways. It's not the kind of things that I really like, but it's still the configuration management. And then you can start doing the script. Okay, I'm going to write a script to make this transform, to change the configuration of my system. And I will run that script to many, many systems in my environment. I use PowerShell remoting, and I go to many, many systems, and I can do this. And that's a script transform. You don't care about the previous state. You assume, or maybe you know the state, and you say, do this for me now. You run the script right now interactively. That's a script transform. Then we evolve a bit the thinking, and we say, well, that's a policy-driven. So policy-driven convergence is really a big word. What does that mean? It's relatively simple. Policy means it's a document, and that's something you want to be in a state. So you say, I want it to be like this. So you have a policy document, which is something you can write, and the computer can understand, and then it will eventually converge to that state. So you say, I want it to be in that state, and then your system will get to that state. That's the principle for Chef, Puppet, DSC. That's exactly what it's about. So I'm just trying to put some concepts behind it so we're not just bogged down into one specific tool or specific technology. So that's policy-driven convergence. We have a state that we define, and the system will get to it. And then we've got the container model. And container model, and then after that, we will have something else. So container model is, well, I need something, I will just spin it up. If my requirements change, I just get rid of it, make the change, and spin the new thing. Right? That's the container management. So I said it's a spectrum, so it's not just about the version. So the idea is, when you do manual, you tend to create very unique things. So you create your pets, your snowflakes, right? That's where you are. And then scripted transform, you evolve, and you can actually reach a greater level of conformity, everything a bit more the same, but you're still very imperative. So as soon as someone does something out of the script that applies to every machine, you will have still some snowflakes. And then you've got the cattle, and it's policy-driven convergence, where you can apply a limited number of roles, or like very broad and generic that will apply to many machines, and you're not going to have that many unique systems. But you can go further with the container model, and even further, a bit like the chickens, where you have many, 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 many chickens, and if one, sorry to say, but if one doesn't look good, you just replace it with another one. Sorry, chicken. So that's the runtime service. And runtime service is much more like, it's much more like function as a service. You don't really care about where it runs, what's really underneath. You just have the runtime, and that specific function is going to run on that runtime. So the trick is, if you think about your world environment, your world infrastructure, where are you at? Well, you have many systems. They not necessarily talk to each other. It's managed by many different teams. So you probably are all around the spectrum. If you have part of the business doing very new things, they're probably going to be on the far right in the runtime service kind of things. But if you still have maybe, I don't know, maybe you're still running Exchange in your data center. Maybe you still have someone clicking through Exchange and making some configurations. So they still have, a very limited numbers of Exchange servers on different VMs, and that might be very manual. Who's running Exchange in the environment? Can you relate to what I said? Yes, okay. Yes. All right, so that's, it's not about having everything as function as a service. Like, I've never seen that. Even Exchange is if you run Exchange in-house, the migration path would be to use Office 365, right? It's not necessarily easy to move there, but like you see the transition. So when you create a new service, maybe you will try to be more on the right, because cloud ready, because it's more flexible. But it's going to be very difficult to say, lift and shift from your manual Exchange server. You're not going to take your manual Exchange server and just maybe running it the same way on Azure. Maybe you will use Office 365 instead. So I will get back a bit about infrastructure as code. Everyone's familiar with infrastructure as code? Yes, hands up if you're not. Not familiar? Oh, everyone's familiar, okay. I'm just gonna go a bit faster then. What I was saying is we want to declare the intent. So I'll rewind a bit. Every change in yours, one of the big issues in IT is managing your configuration, but everything is managed over time. So what's happening is today you have a requirement, tomorrow you will have another one. And everyone knows like priority is changing and there's a lot of things going on, it's very hard to keep track. So if you're manually going on a system using RDP and you go and you change a box, if you're alone and you have one server, that's very easy. If you're not alone in your team and you have one server, it's already a bit more difficult because you need to tell him when you changed. If you have many servers and many people, that's really getting crazy. So you need to have some ways to communicate around the change, declare what the change you've done, and say, hey, I'm changing this to be different on all of these machines, right? So the first thing that happens is you change the intent. At some point, someone tells you, well, we don't have only one employee, we have 2 employees. Simple example. And that goes along. So you have an event which is at the human scale. So someone says, I want X to be like Y. And this is the intent. So one way of doing infrastructure as code is to declare that. Whether you write a line of code that does it for you, doesn't really matter. But the best is to have it declaratively. So then it's easier to communicate with humans. So I say, I will add a new server. And YAML and VCS, so version control systems like Git, and GitHub is a server for VCS. This is the collaborative interface. So the idea is you can manage everything through Git because you change the intent or you change the code and that goes into Git and everyone can see it. This is where the collaboration happens. Okay? Who's been to the GitOps talk? There was a GitOps talk, yeah, a few of you? Okay, that might be part of the talk. I haven't seen the talk, but I assume a lot of it is about Git, the interaction with Git. And Git is really good at scaling these workflows across many people in a team or different teams together. So from this change of intent and this definition, the policy you wrote, the policy says, well, X must be like this, right? So you declare this. And there's an abstraction that goes, like from this declaration that you ask, you need the code to run, right? So that's something you're going to create. I'm going to go a bit deeper in a bit. And then you also need to compose it. So you have different elements that you want to put together. And what is the very common bricks in PowerShell ecosystem? It's modules. I want certain things to happen. I will use that module, that module, that module. That's the composition of modules that can help me being more efficient, doing more things. So that's the composition. And then we have a CI/CD pipeline. And this is what helps us from the change we did to deliver that change automatically to the end of the pipeline. So that's, think about, the conveyor belt going. That helps you doing all of this automatic. So what's really important is you, as a human, you say, we want to change the system, and then you make that change, and the change happens automatically by being tested, being implemented, and then also by creating artifacts. What's an artifact? Is when you change some code somewhere, then you compile things into something which is immutable, that doesn't change, and versioned. So, as a module is an example. If you use a module, version 1.0.0, and then a new version comes, 2.0.0, you know that there's a change being the 2. So they're both immutable, so they're not going to change unless the version change. That's the key element to artifact management. Once it's created, packaged up, and versioned, it should never change. Imagine, and that happened, imagine using package version 1.0.0, and actually the package changed completely without changing the version. That sounds like your script that relies on this is going to break, and that happened. So that's the principle. Never change an artifact. It's trusted, it's a given version, and it's ready to deploy. By testing this version of this artifact, you build trust, and that's very important. And the key of the pipeline is to build trust. The key of the automation in your pipeline is for you to trust it. That's very, very important. If you change some code for your PowerShell module and you use Pester to test it, what Pester tells you, if all your test passes and you have a good coverage for your test, that means you can trust the change you made. It doesn't break your module, and it still delivers in all the other tests that you wrote before. And that means you make a small change, all the test passes, you trust it that it should be okay, so you can release that module. If you have no test, you need to still test yourself, but that might take some time. Automating it makes the delivery much quicker, and the changes much quicker. So you improve the change capability of those modules. And for infrastructure as code, when you've created those artifacts, then you need something which is the convergence engine that just executes those configurations. So if you're familiar with DSC, that would be the LCM, so the local configuration manager, the Windows service, that would execute that configuration. If it's Puppet or Chef, it would be the agent doing this. So that's the idea is you have changes coming from a human, and as soon as the human pushes the change to the source control, so to Git, it will push it, the automation and everything after that should be automatic in the CI/CD pipeline, and you should trust it because you wrote the test as well, and then that should be delivered to your system. That's what infrastructure as code is about. So there's quite a few elements. Are you okay? I know it's a bit difficult. I just wanted to go relatively fast on that one, but just to make sure we're all on the same base, and like that's some of the concepts. So that's really the key, one of the key elements for configuration, infrastructure as code. And this applies to many, many types of configuration management. It doesn't apply when you do things manually because there's no this automation, but when you do function as a service, or when you do DSC, or when you do Puppet, Chef, Ansible, all of these usually is the pattern that they recommend you to use. So that's very generic. So just a quick recap on do's and don'ts. So it's good to have an understanding of this configuration management and understand that's a spectrum. And then you have many systems, and they may not be at the same level. It's really good to understand where, because maybe one of them is going to be the bottleneck for automating another system. So it's not about just automating everything. It's about finding the relations between those, seeing where they are on the spectrum and where they need to be for you to be more efficient. And we'll talk about that a bit more later. And understand the maturity of the automation you have. Let's say if you automate some things, but you run the automation and it has to wait for you to run the automation, maybe it could just be updated automatically. If you know the end state you want to be in, what stops you to just let it happen, automatically converge to that? If you have to be behind your desk running the script 10 times a day, it's good, it's on your script. But at the same time, maybe it should happen automatically so you can think of something else. And understand that every change we're doing, it's all about changes. And every change we're doing comes from a change in requirements, which is done at the human level. I don't know, someone joined the company. We need a new service provided by the IT team, the platform engineering as an example. Everything comes from a human change, and then the system makes it happen. And try not to go forward too fast. So some people say, okay, as an example, I put lift and shift, which is a bit more complex than that, but people want to say, hey, I've got this in my environment, I just want to do the same thing in the cloud, so then I've got the flexibility on everything, but they don't change the way they implement, and they just take it, lift, and they say, hey, I'm going to re-implement exactly the same management system on the cloud. So not only they're still doing a click next kind of approach in the cloud, but on top of having the complexity they had on their new in their environment, they're adding the cloud layer, I would say, in there. So best sometimes to rethink what you're moving to the cloud, which you should definitely move to the cloud when you can and when it makes sense to you. And yeah, don't react to the system. Who's using a CMDB? Oh, not that many. That's good. So CMDB, CMDB is a good thing when you use it right, but I rarely see a CMDB being used right. So CMDB should not drive. So a CMDB is configuration management database, right? And there's many tools that says they're doing a CMDB. And the problem is how it's used sometimes is when it's monitoring and doing the inventory for your system, and it drives the configuration of your system based on what he knows. So he gets some information and says, oh, you're in this, you should do that. And having a central database to do this, or a script, it's very risky because you not necessarily know exactly which state, and it's a lot of fragment of configuration. Grab me later if you really want me to moan about CMDBs. It's very dangerous. You should define your system, define how your system should look like, and you should converge to this. You should not have a back and forth between your CMDB and your change in configurations. So if you have a CMDB, as an example, or systems management, SCCM, or if you have a CMDB which allows to see a report, and you can click to do something to fix the report, usually that's a bad practice. So you see, you have a dashboard and says, hey, those 3 machines are not configured properly or don't have this software. If you go and click, say, install this software, that's not the right approach to configuration management. Who's doing this? I'm sure a lot of you. The problem with this is it's imperative. So it's a good stopgap, but it's very risky. The problem is you do it once, next week you're going to have to do it again. And that means you need to constantly monitor the things. What should be is all this software should be at the latest version. And you should only be notified, and it should be automatically remediated by the definition. That means software Git should always be at the latest version. Then that should just happen. You should not have to do it. It should be automatic, unless you have a specific rule that tells you if it's a major version release, then it should be staged. First going to the test environment, then going to the prod environment, and starting to stage from this. But that should not require your input if you know the rules already. All right. Automation. So one of the questions is, automate all the things. Yeah, that's why we're here, right? We're doing PowerShell. We want to automate all the things. So why? Why do we automate things? Yeah, that's kind of the idea. So tell me, shout, like, what's the benefit, what's the end goal of automation? Saving time? Who's for saving time? Okay. Anything else? Sorry? Repeatable. Yeah. Repeatable, anyone? Yeah, okay. Saving time. What time? Why? It's actually a good question. So, saving time is good for you, right? Is it good for your business? Yes? Why? So the idea is, it's not just about automation or just saving time, and we will see a bit deeper why. Saving time is good, but you need to be clever about what time you're saving. If you're just saving yourself, even 4 hours a week, automating something, the question is, how does that serve your business? Okay, it frees you to do maybe more automation, but you need to understand what your role and what your team fits in the bigger picture, and how that impacts the business. And being able to understand this sometimes helps you making better decisions for your business. Sometimes, and I've been there, I've automated a lot of things, and say, but that saves me a lot of time. But the business and outside my team, no one could see the difference, and I will get into the details why. And the key element is actually we are here and we are hired to deliver value to the business. And eventually, it's just for the customer. And the customer may mean different things. You may not have an external facing customer, or you don't have, it's too far down the value chain to actually see the customer. But you have internal customers. If you're in a systems team, maybe you're in platform engineering, and then you have devs, as an example, who use that platform. And this is where you need to understand where your position sits and where your team sits in the organization. And by knowing that, you will make better decisions, and you will also have better communications to say, well, this is what we're doing, but maybe that doesn't impact the business at all. But if you choose right because of your customer, and you communicate with them correctly, you will have a bigger impact in your enterprise. So to deliver value, we do automate, and that's a good thing. But we need to focus on value-creating tasks. So some of the things doesn't provide value. If it's just repeatable and it's only 5 minutes and automating it doesn't change much, maybe that's not the priority. Maybe if it's a 4-hour task, and that's really a pain for you, and it's hard to repeat, then definitely automate it. But then it will have an impact on you, but people will just see you're busy, but they don't provide business value to others people outside of your team, right? So make sure, and who's struggling to get budget, struggling to get projects which doesn't impact anyone else but just your team. Well, the problem is if you don't deliver value to the others, you're going to have a very hard time to advocate for deep change within your team, right? And we automate parts of a complex network of value chains, and I'm going to get into that, so I'm not going to go too far. And we talk very quickly about the pipeline, and the idea you will have many pipelines to decompose everything you're doing, and all the pipelines should more or less fit together. So you create one module in one pipeline, another module in another pipelines, and then those two modules will be used in your infrastructure. That might be another pipeline. So you have many pipelines communicating, creating different modules, different artifacts that eventually going to be merged together and provide a service or a product. So very quickly, I'm probably going to screen. So the idea is finding who the customer is, right? And we exist as a team, in an IT team or a platform team or an infrastructure team. We exist to serve the customer. The customer has a need. We provide a product and a service, and that's provide value to them, right? That's the very basics of how value works. So if you think about a business, they have these external or maybe sometimes just internal customers, and the business exists to provide value to that customers. And within that, you have different layers, to some extent, or different chain of value being created. So imagine some customer to a business, they want to have a service. I don't know, maybe it's having compute available online, like Azure or AWS. And they need a service management portal. They need to have the portal so they can manage the service. So I'm just going to focus on the service management. So it's just a website, and that website helps managing the service. This is very high-level needs of the customer. But that customer needs to, the service management needs to have the management dashboard, right? That's a very specific piece of technology that is done by developers. But that management dashboard needs to have identity and access management, RBAC and all those kind of things. Maybe communicate to Active Directory or something else. It needs to have a web server, object storage, and the platform to run on, right? Like an OS, Windows running with IIS, whatever. Well, IIS would be the web server, probably. This is what the infra team manages, right? And the management dashboard is the dev team. So clearly we can see the dev team is the customer of the infra team, right? So that's a value chain. You have the customer of your business, and then you can separate the needs on the products that respond, like create the value to their customers, and then you can see which one fits. And that's very important because we are all providing products. We all have customers, right? And when you think about what impact your work is doing, you need to think about this. If it's just within your team, it's not necessarily going to be seen upstream. And what really counts usually, especially for us IT, it's very hard to have the right conversation because it's very hard to show or improve things upstream. So that's value chain. There's actually a very good talk by Chris Hunt, which was PowerShell Summit 2019, the PS Summit in the US. So that's about Wordley maps. It's the same principle, but like it's an hour talk about strategy and how to starting by this value chain model, or you can actually map those value chains and see how things will evolve over time and what you need to create a product, do a customs, or actually just maybe just buy an off-shelf solution. So that's a really good talk. I'm not going to go too deep. I just wanted to present you the value chains, and that's the Wardley maps. So what I really want to get a bit more into is what to automate. So the first thing is theory of constraint. Who's read the Phoenix project? Yeah, so that should be familiar. So from the goal of the Phoenix project, any improvement not made at the constraint is an illusion. So if you're automating something which is not what's constraining the system, you're probably not helping anyone except maybe you. And that's something that it took me a long time to realize. I was much happier on my job, but no one knew what I was doing. So we go back to the example where we have the dev team needing a web server, some object storage, a web server service, operating system. So web server service would be IIS. The web server is the global entity which used object storage, maybe to just store the VM or the hard drives or the data, whatever. And then you have the operating system under the web server service, which could be IIS. And you have the VM network, a virtual machine, VM disk storage, that's the platform. Familiar, that's like whether you run that on the cloud or whether you run that on your vSphere environment. Anyway, that's fine. So that's the platform. So what's limiting the throughput of these dev team and the platform team? What would help the business delivering value quicker? So a value for the business is when there's a new feature on the management dashboard, as an example. So you can be on the platform team on improving the platform bit. If it takes, I don't know, let's say it takes 2 days to create a VM to manage with the web server service, right? Yeah, maybe you reduce that to 3 hours or 2 hours, just the time it provision, patches it. But if the object storage takes 4 days, it doesn't matter how long you improve the platform bit. Probably you're still going to be constrained by the object storage. So this is just a very simple thing to making sure the constraint is where you focus your efforts on. When you reduce the storage to maybe just an hour or 5 minutes, because it shouldn't take more than that, then maybe you can go back into the platform and improve it. And the principles behind this is the theory of constraints. And that's been explained in the Phoenix project. That's why I did ask this, right? So another concept, making sure you are aware of these things. I'm just throwing a few concepts behind it because that helps making decisions. You just need to be aware, like you probably know enough with this. And it's common sense. But make sure when you make decisions, you have this in mind. So focus on value, be customer obsessed. If you help your customer is going to help you do whatever you need to help them more, right? If you provide them value, they will trust you and say, okay, I want this. And then you tell, well, I can't help you because I'm busy with these things. And they say, okay, do this, or I can help you. I will be more careful with what I ask you. And then you can negotiate with them. So do communicate, but be customer obsessed. And you think about you providing a product in general. All right, I'm going to go a bit faster. Yeah, strategy and tactics. So how do you deliver value? Do you manually provision or configure your VM? So who's doing VM provisioning or configuration of VM or disk image? Yeah, some of you. MDT, SCCM, this kind of stuff. Packer, maybe? Yeah, some of you? All right. Just because the example I will use, probably going to relate, but this is really IT ops driven, but that applies to many, many ways. So let's say someone asks you for, hey, I want a new VM because I want to do some things. So you get the request on a Tuesday at 3:30 p.m., right? Easy. Everyone's done that. The first thing you need to do is the network config, but it's Tuesday, 3:50 p.m., you got the request in your ticketing system. Nah, you're not going to look at it straight away because you're busy. So most likely, you're going to do it the next day when you get to work or after you check your emails at 9 a.m., right? And the first network config doesn't take long, but it's been waiting, sitting on the queue already for quite a bit of time. 17 hours and 30 minutes to be precise. All right? No, it doesn't really matter. But what you're doing next, you do the network config at 9 a.m., it takes only 10 minutes. Very easy stuff. Then you want to create the new VM. But you have a phone call or you have your stand-up, so it takes you 15 minutes before you can actually get to the task. And you finally do it, which takes 15 minutes. You go into your vSphere environment, right-click, oh, I don't have the template in this, I just need to replicate the templates to that VS Exhaust, and I can do it now. 15 minutes, not too long, it's easy. And then you pre-stage in AD, but you don't have the rights to do it, or maybe you have a meeting or something, so you need to get someone else to do it an hour before you can actually do this. But it takes literally, open the MMC console as an example, just the PowerShell command is barely 5 minutes. Then you actually go to the OS deployment things. So you can do it straight away when it's pre-staged in AD, but that takes 4 hours. You know why? Because patching. You have to do it, but it's 4 hours. You're not 4 hours on the job. You're just like 15 minutes getting it started, like, you know, MDT or something, and then it just patches it for you. So you're getting there. It's still Wednesday, nearly 3 p.m., but you never know exactly when it's going to finish. So most likely you're not going to look at it again because you're going to be busy with other tasks. So you leave it to the next day because you will know it will be finished by then. So next day when you get to work, you can actually do it on Thursday morning. So then you need to do the OS configurations, and maybe you have something which is not automated yet. And we will get, sorry, we will get back to the automation in just a bit. This is just to run through like what's happening with the tasks. And we will see how we will optimize, like the choice of optimizing this flow. So you do the OS configuration, and then you need to do the web server install. So the OS configuration is on you, but the web server install may be in another team, a bit more specialized. So I used to do OS configuration where we had a Word document, which was, I don't know, 20, 50 pages. And that would be, you need to sit there in front of it, doing it manually, and run through this. The problem is you miss a line or you forgot something because you had a phone call, then sometimes it takes you more time to troubleshoot what you missed. But I've been there. And then the web server install is a bit quicker, but still you have some configurations to do. And you finish by doing it at 5 p.m. on the Thursday, but the team will only have it on Friday, 8 a.m., right? So why did I take so long to explain you all of this? Because you've all experienced it. Well, the idea is you find you have the processing time, so the actual hands-on time. That's one thing you need to take into account. The hands-on time, which is actually you doing it, the processing time, which is how often the system is busy, and that's like pretty much exclusively during patching, where you don't need to be on it, but it's just doing its thing. And the lead time is from when you get the request to when the dev team can actually use it, right? So now, how can we improve the system? So obviously, like the very long task I talked about, the 5 hours here, like, there must be a better way. There's different things. There's the time, so saving time is definitely one point, but another point, as you said, is actually making it repeatable. Oh, that's the new one, sorry. So the principle behind this is value stream mapping, and you can do this for your tickets. Like when you have regular tickets that really takes time, and it's a complicated process, do this so you know what the queue time is about and what the hands-on time is, so the processing time. So now we need to look at how to improve the system. So what we could do is focusing on the 5 hours that we need to look at this document on making sure all the configuration works. Let's say, it's taking too long. I want to automate this. I will create a script to do it, which is what we, PowerShell people, usually do. So I want to reduce it maybe to 1 hour, because maybe it's going to be just not one script. It's going to be a few scripts and a couple of modules, right? So we can reduce the hands-on time by quite a bit. So instead, the processing time will also drop, and it will be only 7 hours, 30 minutes, instead of 11 hours and 30 minutes, which is pretty good. And what impact does it have to the dev team? Because that's the customer we have, it's the dev team. So instead of getting it at 5 p.m., they will get it at 1 p.m. on Friday. Do you think they will start using it at 1 p.m. on a Friday? Probably not. Probably they shouldn't anyway. So they get it, oh, sorry, Thursday, my bad. So Thursday. So they will probably get it on Friday morning. They will start using it on Friday morning anyway. So the lead time reduced quite a bit, 51 hours instead of 70 hours. And that's actually what really matters to the business sometimes. It's how quickly can they use it. So you saved 4 hours in the process, but the lead time is actually much better. And if you think about the team, they get it half a day earlier at least. They get it on the Thursday just after lunch, which is pretty good, so then they can start maybe in the afternoon or something. Probably not going to go in production until Monday, though, usually. But then is there a better way to make this improvement? And if you look at these small tasks, they don't take that long, but there's a lot of time which happens waiting. So if we automate these things, these small things, I would say, it could be a bit faster. So it's 45 minutes. So 45 minutes is 45 minutes hands-on time. So this is 4 hours, but it's only 15 minutes when you're actually in front of the computer doing something. So the processing time still going to be very similar because the system will be busy. But the main difference is you're going to reduce all the waiting time because you will automate from one task to the other task to the other task to the other task. It should be automated, right? And by doing so, you actually improve a lot the lead time. It was 50-something hours before, and now it's 46 hours. And the idea is you have it Thursday AM very early. So instead of focusing on these 5 hours that save you time, you focused on those things that doesn't take you that much time. It takes you only 45 minutes. A lot of interruptions, but only for 45 minutes. But that reduces all of the queue time on your ticketing system. So for you, maybe it's just like a few things, doesn't seem as much, but it has a much greater impact into the systems and for the dev teams. Because now they can get their systems much earlier in the week. Make sense? So the idea is system thinking. Don't focus on thinking just about the small things within your environment. Think about what makes sense to your customer. And your customer is probably like some of the teams. What was it? Yeah, so the idea and the title for this was Strategy vs. Tactics. The problem is maybe you don't have time to automate all of this. In that case, maybe it makes more sense to first doing this, so that's going to free you up 5 hours or maybe 4 hours a week, or maybe not a week, but every time you need to do this, so then you can automate this part. Well, the difference is this is a good strategy for your customer. This is a good tactic for you to get the time to do this for your customer. It doesn't matter, and probably you will do this naturally first, but think about, does it really help your customer? Or do you do this just because it helps for your strategy? But if you don't have a strategy, then you're just doing your own thing. And I've been there doing my own things, like, but I saved a lot of time. A lot of time for me, but I never paid it back to the customers, to the other teams. So that's one element. I have no idea how long I've got left, but. Sorry? 15. Perfect. All right, so that's the key elements is understand the impact on the lead time, that's very important, and focus on strategy and using tactics to get there. Like if you're just doing quick wins, probably you're not having a good strategy. And I've been doing that for years. And after, you know, when you stop after 3 months, and like, we've been really busy. What have we improved? Very hard to have a good conversation, say, hey, we need more people to be more busy. No, that doesn't really help. So try to focus a bit on the strategy. Oh, the fear cycle. I like this one. The automation fear cycle. And you are the PowerShell people. You're probably not all PowerShell people in your teams and in your organization. And that's something you will feel in one way or another. And configuration management, when you automate a lot of it, it's even harder. So what sometimes happens is you start doing some automation, and you get into that fear cycle I will talk about, and then you stop using the automation you created. It's like, ooh, I don't trust that automation because since we used that script, well, the system has changed and we haven't updated the script. So we'll do it manually for now, right? So that's the element. You make the first change outside of the automation, maybe outside the script. And they say, yeah, but that's just a quick win now because, you know, that system needs to be fixed now, and we'll get back to this later. Famous last words. So what happened next? Well, the server that used to be consistent and everyone knew about, just someone to do that quick win, RDP into the system, made a change. Good. Problem is, well, we set up that system with a script. We changed it manually. If we use the script or another script that was expecting the state that we thought we were in, but someone changed it, we're not going to trust that script again. So you say you installed a version. That script is made to install a version. Someone said, well, we need to update it, but I'm going to RDP to it, update the package. The next script you add to update it doesn't necessarily know which version, which is a bad example because it should definitely not be hard-coded, but that's what's happening. So people are in fear, and then they say, well, because the script, the system has changed, someone RDP to it, I don't trust that script to work again. So we're just going to do another quick win. And then we're just going to change that tiny thing. So you create automation, someone circumvent the automation, and in the end, they don't trust the automation anymore, and it's just going back to manual. Who relates to that? Yeah, a few people. I've seen people nodding around, yes. And that's the automation fear cycle. So very important, don't ever get there. And sometimes I recommend very harsh policies, which is if you really start automating, like a system, like so it's not someone making a change, it should be a system making a change, like whether you drive it from Jenkins or whether you drive it from some automation script running somewhere, people should not be able to make any change related to this directly to the system. Someone should not be allowed to RDP to it. It should stop. Otherwise, you get into this and you create some automation. Instead of fixing the automation and make it evolve, someone circumvent it, and then you could just not automate again. So you have to start again from scratch. You don't even know where your system is again. So that's one of the big issues. And you create what? You create snowflakes. And instead of having many things properly organized with your scripts, like that's been deployed with your script and managed with your configuration management, you actually have a snowflake factory. You have a lot of things which is done initially, and then everything diverges from your standards. And that is really hard to maintain. So start small, iterate, make it evolve. You should not do like a broad things. Narrow it down so that no one can change that if they are RDP or something. They lose the privilege as soon as you automate it. And then evolve it to make sure like it's something that grows over time. If you have to replace it or if you have to circumvent it, you're going to lose the automation. So don't half implement automation that needs to be bypassed. If you try to do too much and it needs to be bypassed most of the time, then that's not going to work. And if you start automating, don't ever get into the fear cycle. Don't let anyone go directly onto the machine and make a change. When I say directly, that could be just using remoting. If they have permissions to go into doing remoting and making a change, that's probably bad. Use GER instead, so they can read everything directly using remoting, but not make a change. If you have to break the glass, like if really something happens, there's a production issue, the first thing you do when you have like a bit of time is make sure your script is actually reworked, refactored to take into consideration that change. It's okay to break the glass because you have to, like we all have production issues, and sometimes it's quicker to just go and fix it, but the script itself should be the very next thing you're working on. It's not, we'll get back to it later, no. Very important. Oh yeah, understanding complexity. I really need to go faster now. Complexity is a very complex problem, right? There's many, I see it, I just have a dirty mental model, which is about a formula. So think about it. It's about the number of people, the number of components or nodes you have in your infrastructure, the number of technologies used, the number of teams, because each team needs to communicate, and you can think about an interface between one team to another. The institutional knowledge in the company. Oh, we do this because of this reason that happened in 2016, whatever. Like, there's a lot of this going on, but it's very hard to keep track of those. And there's no way actually to keep track of those. Oh, yeah, sorry, SharePoint? That doesn't work. Try it. Or maybe some people manage to do it. I don't. And so the number of changes that happen. If you have one machine that's been set up in 2016, and then how many logon attempts from RDP you had since 2016? If you have 2,000 or maybe more people remoting to it, doing some changes, That sounds bad. Do you know exactly which state that machine is? Probably not. That's why the system, the automation, should change it, not the people. And the edge of the company, actually, because everything happens over time, so time is also a factor. So if you do the product of all these complexity elements, this is what really complexity in general is about. So if you have one server managed by one person with one system on it, we can do it with click next finish, easy. If you have 1,000 server managed by one person, first of all, that's going to be difficult. But if they're all exactly the same, and there's only 1,000 server, but all exactly the same, maybe 1,000 is too many. But you have 10, you can still manage. Add 10 people managing 10 servers, that's very much difficult. So by doing the product of all these complexity elements, this is what the overall complexity is about. So these are all the things. On the technology itself, it's just one line into those. Having the number of people is also, you need to communicate, and that's a key element. I know what I want to change in that system, but everyone needs to understand why, what's my intent, and if I do it or not. Or I was doing it, but actually I stopped in the way because I remembered that wouldn't work. The communication is really hard. So review often how things are evolved, and then making sure the best is to document something. And that's why configuration management and infrastructure as code is good when you have a policy document which says, this is the state we should be in now. And that should automatically apply to it. That's why I really recommend you look into the technologies that enable you to do that. So what's the best tool? That's the question everyone wants to know. What's the best tool to achieve this? Any idea? Someone? No one wants to dare? Sorry, PowerShell? PowerShell? Who thinks it's PowerShell? You're the only one. Sorry.
The best tool is what suits you.
Yes, it's what suits you, but actually it's what's the best tool to the problem. So if we just go back there, how does PowerShell help when the complexity is driven by the number of people working on the element? So one of the things is number of people. There's abstraction, which is one technique to help. Git is a tool that helps a lot with having a lot of number of people working together in a piece of code. So that's why complexity helps you understand what part of the problem you're trying to solve. So to solve the bigger problem of complexity, you need to address the different problems with different tools. There's no one tool that helps you. And then adopting the tool is another issue. So the best tool, which one should I start for configuration management? DSC, Puppet, Chef, Ansible? Who's for DSC? Come on, I'm not the only one. Yeah, but it doesn't really matter. Maybe to you, DSC is the best way to start. Maybe you already have Puppet in your environment. The problem is not about which tool. It's about you should start now to learn and try, and probably fail sometimes, but it's going to be a small scope, so it doesn't really matter. And see what works, and it's actually changing the way you work. And then that's going to be just a very little part of the complexity problem you're trying to manage. And that's the question I ask, what's best? A screwdriver, a hammer, or a cutter? It depends what you're doing, right? If you're trying to fix your computer, I don't think a hammer is going to help you much, right? Maybe relieve some stress. And some people say, yeah, I prefer using Terraform anyway. Well, Terraform doesn't really do configuration management. It does some provisioning, right? So all of those got their little, quirks. But the problem is to find out. Either you need to read a lot, but the best is to experiment a bit. So try them out. Don't wait. Like DSC's been there, and DSC is the new kids on the block, maybe with Terraform. DSC's been there since 2012 R2, right? So that's been a few years. Who's tried DSC? All right, who tried Chef or Puppet? Yeah, not many. What are you waiting for? So that's the key element, right? It doesn't matter which tool you're using. It's about thinking of the problem you're trying to solve and try to see the spectrum, the configuration spectrum you have and you are in, and see if you have ways to improve and evolve. And that's the thing. What's the point of those tools? We have PowerShell. PowerShell is good for some automation, but if you have imagine, okay, you said PowerShell helps me to manage my configurations. Imagine how many lines of PowerShell you need to automate all your infrastructure. It's like thousands and thousands and thousands and maybe millions of lines. If you have one script does that, is it really going to help you? If any change comes in, you need to read the whole thing. So PowerShell is a good tool, but you need to have abstraction layers and composition. So there's many techniques and tools to do this, and that's what configuration management and the practices and the pipelines and all of these elements and techniques I talked about help you achieve. So one of the big benefits of trying a transformation using configuration management is actually reverse engineer your infrastructure. You've had an Exchange server for 10 years. You have an Active Directory for maybe more than 10 years, maybe 20 years. Do you know the schema you have? Do you know all the changes to the Active Directory schema that you had over 20 years? And do you know, let's say you have an issue with the Active Directory, like, I don't know, a security issue, you need to create a new domain, a new forest, and then migrate everything? Do you think you can do this if you have a 20-year-old Active Directory and you don't have the right documentation? It's very hard. So by automating and using infrastructure as code, you reverse engineer the institutional knowledge and the technological knowledge into some policy document says that's what we have because that's what we want, and the systems automates that. But don't say, oh yeah, but I want you to use DSC, but DSC doesn't do this. Or I want to use Puppet, or I want to use Puppet, but the enterprise version is too expensive. Don't start with the enterprise. Start with the open source one. It's actually very good. The enterprise is going to help you there, but if you already know what you need, if you know where the limitations are, it's much easier to say, we need to pay for the enterprise version because we need to have this feature in the enterprise version. So start with what's free and open source on DSC, Chef, Puppet, Ansible. All of those you can start for free. Or DSC is free if you already have the Windows OS, but I assume you do. All right? Do you have any questions? Sorry, that was like a lot. I hope we're still with me. All right, so if you have any questions and you want to grab me after, feel free to ask. No questions? No whatsoever? Good? I've lost you all? All right, get some coffee then. There's another session after that. Thank you.